Deity worship in India has a scriptural basis. In the general, we could say in the world, sometimes they refer to deities as idols. And idols has a connotation of being something that a person concocts out of his own mind, and it has no reference to scripture or even to being authorized by the Supreme Lord. That may be so in other scriptures of the world. They don't like to have forms. But in the Vedic literatures, and particularly the Puranas and the Pancharatra, we find that the deities are accepted as integral to the whole process of spiritual development. Now, there are different processes of development. So we have, broadly speaking, Karma Yoga, Gyan Yoga, Astanga Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. All of these accept the worship of the deity form in some way or other. In Karma Yoga, of course, they also worship deities of Devatas, as well as Vishnu. In Jnana Yoga, they also worship Vishnu and other deities, even though ultimately the Shankarites consider these forms to be secondary and illusory. And in yoga, of course, they also worship. For instance, in Bhagavatam 2, second canto, the yogis worship through meditation. So they meditate on the form of the Vishnu Rupa, or the universal form. And if they're more advanced, they worship the form of Paramatma. So even worship of the mind is a type of deity worship. The image of the Lord in the mind is called a mental form. So as opposed to that, we also have the external form. So normally when we think of deity worship, we think of that external form, but it also includes the internal form, that is the mental form as well. And in bhakti itself, we'll find that deity worship takes on a very, very major role, more than in the other yogas. And I'm speaking, of course, of that external worship. And the Pancharatric scriptures deal with this in great detail. So in terms of authenticity, there are several factors. One is the form itself. What is the form of the Lord? So that has to be authorized by Scripture. We cannot make up a new form of the Lord. So the Scriptures give us the actual forms of the Lord. And then, how to represent that form of the Lord, that is also given in Scripture. So we have, for instance, in Bhagavatam, it explains that we have different forms. You can make a form out of wood, stone, metal, and other substances, including the mind. And we have details of how to make those forms in the Stapati Shastras. That is the persons who make deity forms and make temples. They have scriptures for that. And in those scriptures there are descriptions of what these forms should look like. So if we have a form of Vishnu, it will give the exact proportions, what his eyes should look like, and the proportions of the face, the proportion of the head to the rest of the body, etc. The different postures, all of these things will be listed. And therefore the sculptor, the one who makes the deity form, doesn't leave anything to his imagination. So for instance, even in Mayapur, they had deities made of Panchatattva in South India. So those were trained Stapatis. So they wanted to make those deities according to certain proportions, which they had learned in their tradition. And that comes from Scripture. So the making the deity is according to Scripture. The actual form is according to Scripture. Then another thing which is scriptural is how to make that form authorized in terms of worship. So that is what we call the installation or the pratishtha. So without that, the deity form actually is not a real worshipable deity. So it has to be authorized by devotees who worship the deity and do this initial installation ceremony. So the installation ceremony also has to be done according to Scripture. So that makes it authorized. And then we have the authorization of the procedures. How do we worship that deity once it is installed? So these procedures are also given in various scriptures. And for the Vaishnavas, we have the Pancharatric scriptures. And they give the details of that worship. The summary is given in the Bhagavatam itself in the 11th canto. It gives a summary of the procedure for deity worship. In the Hari Bhakti Vilas, we have a more detailed description of the process from beginning to end. And Hari Bhakti Vilas, of course, takes its reference from various Puranas and Pancharatra scriptures. So from beginning to end, the whole process of deity worship actually has a basis in scripture and doesn't deviate from that. However, with that scriptural background, it is up to the devotee to worship the deity with devotion. So that devotion itself is not scriptural, that is something personal. So there's a combination of authentic rules and regulations for everything, plus the added factor of the devotion of the devotee, which is the most important thing of all.